thing that's quite frequently associated is this year there was a fall of stars during the night preceding the first day of the month Jomadi 2, which continued from the beginning of the night until dawn. At the same period, earthquakes were felt in all parts of the world. Now, it's very possible that an account like this, again, the Tunguska object showed us that the object doesn't even have to strike the ground to cause earthquakes. If the Earth is being peppered by a meteor shower and there is actually stuff striking the ground, one should expect there to be earthquakes. But quite frequently through the literature, one sees repeatedly the meteor showers associated with earthquakes. Here again, look, in the year 323 of Hegira, several violent shocks of an earthquake were felt in Egypt. And about the same time, many of those meteors called falling stars of a very remarkable kind likewise appeared in Egypt. Like I said, there are many examples of this tying together activity in the heavens with some kind of a related activity on Earth. Elizabeth.
There's a connection between eclipses and earthquakes. Could eclipses draw in more meteors?
That's an interesting line of thought. And certainly eclipses could trigger earthquakes simply because of the fact that now you have the combined gravitational mass of the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon on the same side, perhaps inducing just enough increased stress to cause slippage along fault lines. I'm going to skip past this one, but interesting comments from NASA's website talking about comets in ancient cultures, and Harbinger of Doom, Menace of the Universe. They've been regarded both as omens of disasters and messengers of the gods, which is interesting because they have this bifold nature. And this is again very, very common, found amongst ancient accounts, is that they looked at them that they had like a good side and a bad side. The bad side, of course, was that they could come in and cause devastation in the end of the world, harbingers of doom. On the good side, there was a belief that certain kinds of comets could cause, for example, the crops to grow abundantly. And there we get to some evidence from Tunguska, which has come out since the thawing of the Cold War, that Soviet scientists have been doing about the enhanced fertility of a lot of the things that have grown in the blast area. So what were the gods trying to say? Some cultures read the message by the images that they saw upon looking at the comet. For example, to some cultures, the tail of the comet gave it the appearance of the head of a woman, with long flowing hair behind her. This sorrowful symbol of mourning was understood to mean the gods that had sent the comet to Earth were displeased. Now, of course, you know that the very word comet comes from the Latin cometa, which means what?
Hair.
Long-haired. 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 The very name for comet means long-haired, right? Then we go to the Masonic tradition, and this is something that's found all throughout the Masonic tradition. This may look familiar to you, Sam. What we have here is Father Time, and he's plaiting the hair on this maiden, and she's mourning, she's sorrowful, and she's standing before a broken column. And this figure of Father Time with angel's wings holds what? A scythe. And what was the other symbol for comets that was frequently, besides swords and spears, was scythes or sickles? And which, now when you go and you read, for example, Book of Revelations, and it talks about the great angel coming down to earth with his sickle, and he's about to reap the harvest of the earth with his sickle, it perhaps puts it in a new light. But then you notice when you put all of these elements together, what we have is a coherent message that can only be read by those who are familiar, who have the what?
Language of the birds.
The language of the birds. There we go, Whit.
Yeah.
Who have the keys to decipher it. So this is written in the symbolic language. Notice she holds cup in her hand. Its top looks very similar to Zeus's thunderbolt. She holds something in her hand. What is this?
A branch.
Kind of a branch.
Acacia?
An acacia branch. Now, what was the significance of the acacia branch?
That's what the Ark was made out of. It. Ark of the Covenant.
No, that was, the Ark of the Covenant? No. That was, shittim wood. The Ark of Noah was not made out of acacia, actually. It was made out of,
I should know that.
you should know that. She's holding a sprig of acacia, yes. Now,
Well, giraffes eat it. It has thorns too.
this, well, in the Masonic symbol, I actually don't know the botany of the plant. I probably should. There's probably some hidden knowledge in there. But in Freemasonry, the acacia is a symbol of resurrection after death.
That's right.
After death.
In natural medicine, it's used to stop pain and to heal. It's regenerative, and it's
Yeah.
used to stop pain.
Mm-hmm. So notice also she's got a book. Here's the broken column. There's 3 steps. And then what's this right over here?
So
An
now
hourglass, signifying what?
Time is running out.
Time is running out, yes. Now, long hair, the broken column. In this context of what we've been discussing in here, now what does that broken column probably represent?
a civilization.
A civilization, yep. There is the handiwork of man right there, falling into ruin. And here is this, all of the elements, the long hair, the sickle, the long beard, because the other way they described comets were elderly men with long white beards.
What about the book?
The book? Well, yeah, what about the book? What is that book?
It could be the book of life.
Wisdom.
But in any case, I think what we've got there, she's in mourning. See, what we'd have to do is we'd have to go to the Masonic tradition, because the Masonic tradition will tell us what page or what that book is open to. And that, of course, is going to be a major clue to deciphering the symbolic meaning of this juxtaposition of symbols that we have here. But I think you've seen enough to have a pretty good idea of one of the things it may be pointing directly at in a literal sense. Let's speed on through and get to the New World. Some of my favorite authors about such subjects, Victor Clube and Bill Napier, who basically launched the group that I refer to so frequently, the British neo-catastrophist school, who have looked very closely at the whole Taurid meteor system and have looked into the history of catastrophe on Earth, and have looked more closely into the effects of catastrophes on human culture and human civilization, whereas most American astronomers and geologists and paleontologists that have been looking at it have looked more deeper into the past of its large-scale effects, on ancient life, prehistoric life, pre-human life, whereas these guys and the neo-catastrophists have been looking at it in the context of our own history. How is it affecting us? What they're talking about here is the earliest recorded myths are those of combat between a god or hero and a dragon. The dragon was a familiar figure in Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Babylon, India, China, North America, and elsewhere. Usually he has the form of a winged serpent. He is a gigantic monster. He spouts fire and smoke, bellows and hisses. He throws rocks and is the creator of terrible destruction, and his home is in the sky. Now, here we have from a Mexican Codex, probably put down before the Spaniards arrived, and it's a depiction of a meteor and showing the meteor descending. There's probably not enough information here to determine what particular stars those are, although I'm sure that they weren't just random but did represent a particular star field. It would not be too inconsistent to think that perhaps it's the Pleiades.
Would that have anything to do with the smoking guns?
With the what?
The smoking guns?
We're coming to that. Okay, here we have from Europe, the other side of the world, we have, this is from a work in 1667 called Theatrum Cometicum, and we see that the comet is depicted as a cosmic serpent, we don't know really. I mean, we go back 1,000 years. If the calendar, we don't know necessarily. I mean, because even you go back a century, and the calendar being used. If you read the accounts of Tunguska, it'll talk about June 15th or something. But that was the date of that calendar they were using, and it coincided to June 30th of our modern date. So it's hard to say. Here's another depiction of the meteor as the descending dragon, and also associated with the lightning bolts. Another variation on the same theme. And then, of course, we have here in North America, we have Serpent Mound. How many of you guys have been to Serpent Mound?
I lived right by him.
You live by them? Well, you've certainly been there then, right? Okay, now, did you know this? That the Serpent Mound is renowned for a large geological disturbance. So did you know that you live on or very close to a large geological disturbance?
Mm-hmm.
You suspect it,
There were
right?
faults there.
Yeah. The remnants of perhaps the most cataclysmic event ever to occur in Ohio. Serpent Mound sits on the outer edge of the disturbed area, which measures 3.5 to 4 miles in diameter and covers between 12 and 15 square miles. Within the central part of the area, rocks have been thrust upward at least 1,000 feet from their original positions.
Well, are they underground?
Yeah, they're on the surface.
They're on the surface.
They've
but-
come up 1,000 feet.
Yeah, they've come up 1,000 feet. If you go outward, these rocks that are exposed at the surface, at the center of this disturbed area, are 1,000 feet below ground. But right here in this one area, they're at the surface. And they're all, they say disturbed, it means they're all shattered and broken up.
Cracked. The Indians used them for a lot of sacred places. They used to go up and have ceremonies in them.
Yeah,
And hollow them out and stuff.
really.
Then when you douse up in there, it's a lot of energy.
Yeah, see, you're onto something there, for sure. Because this I think is a major key to the whole terrestrial alchemy that the ancients were practicing. Because they knew about these sites of this unusual energy that are being confirmed by geologists just by looking at the fact that there's this unusual structure there.
How many do you think of the earthworks around the planet are actually impact or extraterrestrially related to it? You know what I'm saying?
Well, many of them have astronomical orientation. The majority of them have an astronomical orientation. Now, I'll show you, I'm working on a map that's correlating the sites of the ancient earthworks in North America to North America's fault lines. And I've done only preliminary work on it and then put it away and haven't touched it in a couple of months.
But do you think it's related to meteorite or comet impacts that then they make into a sacred site?
Well, bear in mind that all the water, subterranean water, flows along the lines of least resistance, which are the fault lines and the fractures within the lithosphere. Generally, most geologists have attributed those fractures to purely endogenic phenomena, meaning confined within the earth, terrestrial phenomena, tectonic phenomena. I will suggest, and I didn't originate this because there have been a lot of geologists now that have begun to think along this line, that a lot of the fault lines and fractures may be the result of these hypervelocity impacts. And really, when you think about somebody coming up and, with a 38 and shooting your windshield. You're going to have a point of impact, but you're also going to have fractures radiating out from that.
So it's kind of like cosmic acupuncture?
Very much like cosmic acupuncture. That's a very good analogy. And so it could be then that it's the impacts that set up the pattern of fracture lines, and then the water traversing the fracture lines sets up the patterns of energy transference in the electromagnetic spectrum. And perhaps the Reichian phenomena comes into there because as Reich was demonstrating and others have demonstrated since then, it seems like this cosmic force that he referred to as orgone somehow seems to be have a very strong affinity with flowing water. And it may be that it has an even stronger affinity with water flowing underground. So but we definitely know that water moving underground and pressures building and subsiding along fracture zones can actually create phenomena in the atmosphere, in the electromagnetic field, can cause ionization of the atmosphere. Changes in the electromagnetic field can actually affect living things in dramatic ways. Perceptual changes, changes in our consciousness, and so forth.
Well, then why, it's a known fact that Ohio is the only state in the United States that has no natural lakes. What would create that situation?
Underground.
I don't know.
They have a big aquifer. Ohio's full of underground.
There's the aquifer.
Well, what he said has got to be the explanation. I mean, the water's there; it's all underground.
Yeah,
It's probably a lot of lime. I'm going to guess it's a lot of limestone.
that's all there is there. It's
Yeah.
1,000 feet thick.
So
All the caves are all limestone.
yeah, so that makes perfect sense. That you would have, you know, what karstification is.
Yeah.
When the whole limestone terrain is honeycombed
Yeah.
with caves and systems of caves. And
Ohio, when you start getting into Ohio, most of Ohio's architecture is underground.
Mhm.
There's many, many, many caves, and the Indians were all about the energy in that area. And there was so much Indian activity there, and so much to learn about it. You know?
Mhm.
When you do your map, you should overlay it with the dove for neon.
I never even thought of that. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Is there any
Don't you-
correlation between comets and volcanoes?
Yes, most definitely. Let's not go there though, because it's a really interesting discussion, and I'm trying to get at least into the Mayan thing before we end, and I know we're getting towards the end. But all of this has been leading in so that we, you know, because the stuff I'm trying to get you to be familiar with here, we're going to see reiterated in Mayan symbolism. Well, just surrounding this area is a lower area where rocks are approximately at their normal elevations. What's called a ring graben, where rocks have been downdropped, forms the outer portion of the structure. In some locations, jumping down here, the rock layers have been turned on edge or even upside down. The destructive event that formed the structure may have taken place more than 200 million years ago during the late Triassic, which is interesting because there was a late Triassic major turnover in the faunal patterns of Earth, major mass extinction and respeciation event that occurred at the close of the Jurassic. It may have been associated or connected with the formation of this crater. The other famous one that's associated with that time scale is the big Manicouagan crater up in Ontario that I've shown you pictures of. But there's Serpent Mound. You see that, like so many of the ancient earthworks in North America, there's a stream or river right next to it. And this photograph here is interesting because you can see how the builders of this thing were integrating scales of phenomena. You see, here's the serpent. He's got this egg in his mouth, which I liken to if you picture the egg of the Halley nucleus, right? The cosmic egg. And then he stretches back out over this ridge. But in this picture, you can see that the ridge itself, which sits at the confluence of these two streams, this is an ephemeral stream, probably ran permanent, you know, in years past. But you see that the ridge itself forms a serpent's head actually in the landscape. And then the ridge winds this way, like the ridge itself is a serpent scaled up from the serpent here that lies on its back. You almost see the pit viper shape of the head, almost triangular.
And you see the two pits right there.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they, I'm convinced, you know, saw the serpentine nature, the dragon power in the landscape here, put the serpent on top of here. But as it turns out, and this is to me what's very interesting, is that this is the rim of this great disturbed area over here that, according to all the studies, was created by a comet impacting Earth. So I don't know where you live in relation to this, but this is looking, the serpent is on the southwestern corner of the thing. So yeah,
This would be north of the bottom.
yeah. So the structure is this over here, and this is actually the rim of the structure that it sits on. The rim of this structure has formed this serpent in the landscape.
You know what's really spectacular about that when you get up close to it is how tall it is and how perfectly round it is.
You know, I've been there twice so
Yeah,
far.
it's gonna be.
Yep.
Did you ever hear what's in it? Because I've never found out what's in it.
I have some articles on the early excavations of it, and I don't honestly remember. They did some excavations, and they did find stuff, and I don't remember what. Be interesting if what they found was things made out of meteorite iron, but this I don't know. So whether this was a conscious connection or not between a cosmic serpent and this terrestrial serpent,
So, who made the serpent? Who built it?
They don't know,
I don't even know.
right?
have no idea.
They don't really even know how old it is.
Could those two pits been man-made?
No, I don't think so.
I know we went in there and they looked natural, but
I think,
if they could
yeah,
be
they
so
look, I
old,
don't remember them looking like, but maybe.
if
it's
they're
hard
so
to-
old, that would.
Yeah. Yeah, we did go in those pits, didn't we?
Yeah.
That's right, because I remember Jesse taking a fall down the hill. And here's one, a giant earthwork serpent that doesn't exist anymore. This was at Portsmouth, Ohio. And there's the Ohio River. And this was a great circle, which you've seen before because I've shown you this circle overlaid on a map of Atlantis to show you the similar geometry. But this is 5 miles long. From here over to here is 5 miles. So it was a huge, huge engineering undertaking to gather all the earth to build this thing. And it's been almost completely obliterated now.
Yeah, that's what they're showing.
And then we have the flag of Wales, which I'll speed past this, but we've seen this is that the etymology of their term for red dragon actually means sheet lightning, but it also means meteorite. And this makes sense as the Welsh word man translates as stone, while the Welsh word translates as lightning, so literally lightning stone. But they go on in this to talk about how a lot of the Celtic mythology perhaps is describing the fall to earth of cosmic material. And then of course there's the whole studies coming out of these British dendrochronologists now that have discovered evidence that there was a major meteorite or cometary dusting of the earth around 540 AD that may have literally triggered the Dark Ages. But we're going to get beyond this. Here we see meteors similar to hair stars, beam stars, bearded stars. Get this imagery in your mind. The bearded star, the long-haired star, the sword in the sky, the sickle, the dragon, the torch. I have read somewhere, this goes back 1897. A lot of this stuff is found in the old literature. Small fragment of iron that has a curious history. This is one that was found. It is a portion of a massive meteoric iron found upon a brick altar in one of the Ohio mounds. So in other words, what they did was they built an altar, they put a piece of meteorite on it, and then they buried the whole thing under a mound of earth. So this is an example of some of the stuff. There's many examples of this, finding meteoric iron in association with the mound structures. And if you were to read through all of this, there are a lot more examples. Even among the Buddha legends, the association with hair, in this case fragments of his fingernails. And then the story about Muhammad and the black stone. The most sacred jewel of Islam. Toward it, each devout Muslim is bidden to look 5 times a day as he prays. Think about that. So all over the world, Muslims, probably without understanding the significance of what they're doing, are bowing down and praying to the direction of this cosmic stone that fell to earth and is now housed in the Kaaba in Mecca. Comet types. Again, you see the depiction of comets as looking like celestial swords and daggers. Here again, comet types. Again, celestial swords, quite frequently. Lactantius, suddenly a sword shall fall from heaven, that the just may know that the leader of the holy army is about to descend. Well, hopefully, knowing what you now know, you should read a passage like this in the ancient literature and see a perhaps inner significance to it, a literal significance to it. Then also shall be seen a fiery chariot, another symbol, and a brand streaming through the stars to forewarn the peoples of the fire, from Commodian, 903. Most of these guys were pre-Socratics, which means they were 2,500 years ago. This is just the verse of his book, the Commodian, that he wrote. Then shall fall the stars from heaven. The moon shall be hid and no light be in it. The light of the sun shall be suppressed. Half of the sea shall fail. Hades shall be disclosed. The apocalypse of Zephaniah. On that day it shall come to pass that the Lord shall hear it, and in great wrath the heaven and the earth shall be commanded, and they shall cast forth fire, and the flame shall encompass the earth 72 ells, and the sinners devour, and the devils like stubble. Because there's so many of these kind of references from the ancient apocalyptic literature. Fiery angels shall come down from heaven, that we can now look at. Oh, look. Then shall the sun be darkened and the moon changed to blood. The stars shall fall down like leaves, and the heaven shall be rolled up like a scroll. We could go to this account written 2,000 and some years ago, and we'll find a description that almost exactly matches the eyewitness accounts of the people who saw the Tunguska event. I've got all kinds of these, but we're not going to spend a lot of time here. Yeah, look at this. The light of the sun and moon shall grow dark, the stars shall be scattered and fall down, and the heaven rolled up like a sheet of paper. But let's get to the okay, here's a list, and this, how many of you guys would like this list? I can easily give it to you on paper, even if I don't give you the whole thing on CD. Here are the typical symbols and emblems you find associated with cosmic activity. I put the dragon serpent as number one, because I think that's the most prevalent. But then we have swords, spears, and arrows, long-haired, bearded, beams, burning torch or burning lamp, the thunderbolt, swastika, broom, stones from the sky, chariot, as in the myth, scythe or the sickle. So when you become familiar with these symbols and you go now and start reading ancient accounts, with that in mind, it may give you the key to deciphering them on a new level. And I'm going to jump past this.
Oh, Hende's in here, huh?
Oh yeah. And did you know it's located, Ande, where it's located, was actually one of the premier outcrops of the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary catastrophe, where the iridium was exposed, and the right there along, there's cliffs along the town of Ande there.
Well, all those symbols on that cross go into Scientology. You can produce all kinds of musical notes with those symbols. It's really interesting.
I'd like to see that.
I got it on DVD.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
Brian had a movie on it.
That's Jay Weiner, right?
It's very interesting.
Jay Weiner and Vincent Bridges, the two co-authors that wrote The Great Cross of Ande. Yeah, I've been interested in that for many, many years.
It's an E-cross.
Yeah. And we're going to have a whole discussion on it in here one night. Well, yeah, now you look at these paintings, and what you see here, hopefully you will begin to see this in a new literal light. Who is this? St. George, right? What's he doing?
Slaying the dragon.
And slaying the dragon and protecting, who's this maiden over here? Symbol of, sure, of course. Who is the fair maiden that the knight is protecting from the depredations of the dragon? Here again, we have, St. George painting by Gustave Moreau, who was one of these initiated artists along with Poussin and a number of others, Da Vinci, of course.
Well, it was saying,
And
What?
they're-
Yes, yes.
They're
The
initiated
Lady on the
by-
Rock, exactly.
Miranda, where did they go to be initiated? Who initiated what group?
Patrick.
In the case of Gustave Moreau, I'm not sure, although he was definitely known to be associated with a lot of occultic and Masonic types.
Yeah.
He, he was actually a very, very advanced astronomer who studied astronomy and incorporated, specific information. I mean, he had a whole, astronomy laboratory with thousands of books in it that he would study, and he would draw star maps. And then he would, read ancient occult literature and then incorporate what he learned into his paintings. And the painting that I've shown you repeatedly in here was the Fall of Phaeton by Gustave Moreau. But here's another one by the same author. So there's a number of these guys that I think were hip to some inner knowledge and encoded that knowledge into their works of art.
George means earth. Does that have any?
John Martin, another one. And here he's showing this is one of his famous paintings, The Eve of the Deluge, and he's shown very prominently what do you see up in the sky? The approaching comet. And you can actually see here, because if you study this is astronomically consistent with a certain date and time. Because we have the sun setting, we have a new moon. You see, he specifically, I think, put that in there. He was showing sunset with the new moon. And here comes the comet. And then we have the Mithraic tradition, which is completely loaded with these mysteries of the relationship, the alchemical mysteries of the relationship between Earth and the heavens. Symbol of cosmic time. This is worth going into, but notice the head, the lion, which symbolizes what? Leo, the Sphinx, both of them. The serpent winding around his body and the head of the serpent emerging up here. The head of the serpent emerging from Leo. Then we have the 4 ages of the earth down here, symbolized just like we on the Ande stone, the 4 ages of the earth. And here we show the axial inclination of the earth superimposed upon this image of, yes. Yeah, hidden details. That's exactly the deal. That's exactly it, the hidden details. And see, that's what I keep trying to say to people when they get impatient when I show stuff multiple times, because it's only through constant exposure and thinking about this that the details sink in, so that at some point you can begin to fit these pieces together to see the coherent patterns that begin to emerge. If I show somebody something now, and then I show them a major link a month or two from now, and they've forgotten, then no connection is made. And of course, I learned from becoming a Freemason that the way you learn it is you do it over and over and over and over again until it just gets to the point where you're going, enough, and then you keep doing it until finally it's so deeply embedded in your consciousness. Like you might be watching a movie, like I was about a month ago with Burl Ives in it, and suddenly I heard Burl Ives, who was a very famous Freemason, speaking a Masonic part in the movie. And I don't know if he was ad-libbing it or it was written in the script, but there it was. And of course, the reason I recognized it is because I myself have repeated it to myself 1,000 times. So I can't ever forget it. It's impossible for me to forget it. So if I encounter something with that symbolism in it, boom, I see it. Otherwise, it just passes me by in the night. Now here's something that would be very good to, since we come from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and specifically most of us come from Christian tradition. I was raised as a Lutheran, a Baptist, and a Methodist, depending on whose side of the family I was living with at the time.
Wow.
You're in trouble.
I know it.
It kept getting worse.
Yeah, but in any case, being, having grown up in a Christian tradition, this I find to be very significant. Studies of the tradition of the Antichrist. And in the light of what we've been talking about, there's a whole other dimension of meaning to this story about the Antichrist and the numbers associated with the Antichrist. But that's I've got the key, just very briefly, to underline here so that you see the connection. This was a famous scholar, Christian scholar, writing around the turn of the century. But on the other hand, it is clearly implied that the Antichrist legend is nothing less than a later anthropomorphic transformation of the Babylonian dragon myth. Now, that provides a link that can open up a whole new dimension of meaning to the idea of the Christian Antichrist. And believe me, when you start looking into the details of it, it all meshes and it fits, and you realize what they were actually talking about. And so I've got a lot of stuff on that, about the Antichrist, see, when there shall be signs and wonders wrought by the dragon in great abundance, when he shall again manifest himself as God in fearful phantasms flying in the air, and show all the demons in the form of angels flying in terror before the tyrant. For he crieth out loudly, changing his forms also, to strike infinite dread into men. Think about that picture that I showed you of the fireball coming in, right? Now, do you think that people could witness something like that and not have that be permanently and indelibly impressed into their consciousness? Now, when we add in the other dimension, the changes in the cosmic environment may provoke changes in the inner environment. I think we get into what could be the ancient science of alchemy, that the ancient peoples, these lost masters of wisdom, were familiar with, which was the linking of heaven and earth through the conduit of the human organism.
Jeff Volk is his name.
Who?
Jeff Volk.
See, I'm totally unfamiliar with that. So I'm glad you... And we're not going to go into this now, the devil, but this is where we connect with the Mayans, because we find this symbol of the falling demon or the fallen god. In Christianity, of course, it's the fallen angels. Lucifer, remember, was the angel that fell from heaven. And the link with the Mayans, and this is where we will pick it up next time, because this has all been good preparation for understanding this, is with this. The Mesoamerican apocalypse. Very few Westerners know about our own Western apocalyptic traditions, so I'm going to attempt to remedy that to some extent and to show how apocalyptic traditions of the New World perfectly complement apocalyptic traditions of the so-called Old World. Yeah, this is the symbol for Venus, and it has four star symbols under it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, which we will get into in more detail in our attempts to decipher the Mayan iconography. But we find a lot of stuff like this. Here is the diving god, Puhua. Notice he's diving. The Mason's square right here. And he holds something in his hand. He's holding something in his hand as he dives. And here is a ceramic vase also showing a diving god. His feet are up here. Notice his crown has the same star symbols on it. It's got this thing up here with an equilateral triangle. His hands come out. Notice that in each hand he's holding a ball. See that? Okay, these are the details you need to absorb, because we're going to attempt in the next meeting to start reading some of this Mayan iconography. Here's a very effaced representation of a diving god. You can see his feet going up behind him. His head and his arms have been pretty much obliterated, but it's still the diving god figure that's prominent at Tulum. There's another diving god figure partially obliterated right here at Sail. You see his legs extending upwards. His torso is here. The remainder of his body was here. And here we see from Mayan codices a diving dog with flaming torches. This is from the Dresden Codex. Now, also, this up here is what's known as a star panel. And if you know how to read this, it is actually a depiction of a specific snapshot of the sky. So what we have here is a very significant piece of astronomical information. You'll notice that the diving dog, the dog association is critical and important, holds 3 burning torches in his hand. Zontamach, the fallen god, from Codex Borgia. Note Rattlesnake Glyph in the lower right-hand corner. That's this thing. We've covered some of this, but for the sake of the people who haven't been here, what does the Rattlesnake Glyph also represent in Mayan symbolism?
Pleiades.
Exactly, the Pleiades. This is their symbol for the Pleiades. And we see this Zontamach, the fallen god, associated with these star symbols, suggesting perhaps that he's accompanied by other...
There's 7 of these?
There weren't?
No. And there were dark ones too.
Yeah, there are dark ones in there too, exactly.
Black holes.
Uh-huh. Then we have this stucco panel. This was a recreation that was done by an artist around the turn of the century. I went and found this stucco panel and disappointed to report that what I found was almost completely obliterated. But luckily we had a lady artist, I forgot her name, who spent considerable amount of time there and painted what was there in around the turn of the century. But here we have a diving monkey god right next to the rattlesnake symbol of the Pleiades. And we'll talk about this further on and what the meaning of this. This is part of a panel of 20 figures, all representing astronomical constellations.
Quick question. Is there any connection with that in Maya?
I would guess yes. Vase of the Falling Lord. Again, there's a lot of symbolism here that we'll look at. Hanged Man, you've probably seen some familiarity there.
Start bringing it to a close, Chief.
Okay. A few more pictures before we go. We'll look at them again next time when we're going to meet this god, this Mayan god, only referred to by Mayanists as God K.